He survived war zones. He was killed on his own street. Valor wasn't supposed to die in a suburb. Not after all he'd survived IED blasts, midnight raids, the thunder of helicopters over foreign deserts. He made it home. He'd earned peace. But in Crestmoor, peace was fragile, especially for those who didn't fit a certain image. The officers said they feared for their safety. The girl they confronted was 12, and the dog they shot had never once bitten anyone. Ever. When Lina dropped to her knees, cradling her best friend's body, she didn't cry for help. She whispered, "You did good." This is the story of what came after, of a father's promise, of a truth too heavy to bury, and of a legacy that refused to be silenced. The leash clicked into place with a soft metallic snap, and Valor's ears perked not from surprise, but from routine. Lina Brooks, 12 years old and barely tall enough to see over the hedges that lined the Crestmoor sidewalks, gave it a gentle tug. "Let's go, old man," she whispered, her voice the kind of quiet that only grief teaches a child to speak in. Her hand found its way to the thick ruff of fur at Valor's neck, fingers curling gently into the tufts as they always did when she needed reassurance. He leaned into it just enough to say, "I'm here." The suburb shimmered under the late afternoon sun, golden light casting soft halos around the picket fences and imported rose bushes. Lawn sprinklers clicked in synchronized arcs, watering already perfect grass. It was the kind of neighborhood where every car was washed on Sundays, and deliveries arrived in white gloves. Lina and her father had moved in 6 months ago. People still glanced twice when she walked by at her braided hair, at her dark skin, at the massive German shepherd by her side. They never said anything. Crestmoor didn't work that way. But she'd learned to read the difference between friendly and polite didn't wave back. Valor walked at her left side, a silent shadow of protection. He moved with the slow grace of a dog who had seen too much and needed little. His black and tan coat shimmered, a silver sheen dusting his muzzle. Lina knew what that meant. He was older than most thought. But his eyes, sharp, deeply intelligent, and startlingly human, hadn't dulled. Not even a little. They crossed Fairview Lane and rounded the corner onto Orchard Boulevard. Lina's fingers tightened just slightly on the leash. Valor felt it, matched his pace to her stride. She didn't speak, but he knew. There was a house on that block-white shutters, cobalt SUV out front, where a boy once called her a slur through a half-closed window. His mother didn't correct him. She just closed it the rest of the way. Valor hadn't growled. He had simply sat between her and the house until Lina had composed herself and walked on. Today, the curtains were drawn. Still, Valor shifted half a step closer to her. "You remember too, huh?" she whispered. A breeze stirred the maples above them, their leaves whispering secrets only the wind could keep. Lina exhaled slowly and tilted her face toward the warmth. Her father always said walks were grounding, that the sky didn't change for anyone rich or poor, black or white. "Look up when the world gets heavy," he'd said before his last deployment. "The stars are still yours." But it was hard to look up when your mother had died in a hospital bed 2 years ago. And it was even harder when your father was gone more than home. That left Valor. He'd come into her life the day after the funeral. Ethan Brooks had returned with tear-stained eyes and a dog that stood like a statue at the door. "He's retired," Ethan had said. "Used to be K9, bomb squad. He understands grief." Lina hadn't spoken for 3 weeks after that, but she hadn't needed to, not with Valor there. And now, as they walked past the bakery where the owner still never looked her in the eye, She reached down to scratch behind his ear. "We're okay," she murmured. He thumped his tail once against her leg. Ahead, the sidewalks began to clear. Crestmoor didn't have foot traffic, not really. Most people drove, but a few strollers appeared around the corner. A nanny pushing twins in matching cardigans. A jogger with wireless earbuds and sunglasses. A woman with a small white dog wearing rhinestone booties. Lina pulled Valor gently closer, not because she feared him, but because she knew how others reacted. Big black dogs weren't invited to Crestmoor brunches, even ones with medals. They passed a woman pruning hydrangeas. She smiled, sort of, the kind that didn't touch her eyes. "That's a big animal you've got there," she said. "His name's Valor," Lina replied, keeping her voice calm, measured. "He's retired law enforcement." "Oh," the woman blinked. "Well, still, he should be on a tighter leash." Lina said nothing, but Valor, sensing the shift in her breathing, adjusted again, placing himself slightly ahead, a barrier without menace. The woman stepped back instinctively. They turned down the quieter stretch of the neighborhood, the part near the ravine, where the woods started to creep close and sidewalks ended in grass. It was Lina's favorite. There were fewer stairs here. And sometimes deer appeared at dusk, blinking at her like she belonged. She paused under a tall elm tree where the light dappled through like a kaleidoscope. Valor sat, tongue lolling gently, eyes scanning the distance with the idle vigilance of a soldier who no longer had orders but still knew duty. Lina knelt beside him, resting her forehead to his. "I miss him," she whispered, "even when he's only gone for a few weeks. I pretend like I don't, but I do." Valor didn't move, didn't lick her face. He just stayed, present, steady. "I wish you could talk." But he already had. Through every nightmare he nudged her awake from. Through every time she wanted to scream but chose to sit beside him instead. Through every moment the world refused to see her, but he did. The sun had dipped lower. Shadows stretched longer. She checked her phone. "Time to go," she said softly. "Aunt Dee will start texting." They began walking back toward the main street. Lina took the long way, past the community fountain where ducks sometimes lingered. Valor sniffed at a patch of grass. All was quiet. Then the cruiser appeared, black and white, no lights, no sirens, just cruising. Lina's stomach tightened. She didn't stop walking. Valor fell into rhythm beside her, calm but alert. The car slowed as it reached them, rolled forward another foot, stopped. Lina kept her eyes ahead. Just keep walking. Then the window rolled down. "Afternoon," said a voice behind mirrored sunglasses. Officer Riley leaned across the passenger seat. "Where you headed, young lady?" Her fingers clenched around the leash. Valor's ears rotated back subtle, trained. She tried to steady her voice. "Just walking my dog, sir." "You live around here?" "Yes." The second officer, Davis, stepped out of the cruiser. He looked at Valor. "That dog looks a little too big for you, don't you think?" Valor stood taller, not growling, not barking, just present. "His name is Valor," Lina said, her throat dry. "He's retired K-9. He's trained. And he's not going to hurt anyone." Davis took a slow step forward. Riley got out too. And just like that, the golden warmth of Crestmoor dimmed. The next scene had already begun. "Mind if we ask a few questions?" Officer Riley's tone was deceptively casual, but Lina had heard that voice before in documentaries her dad watched, in interrogation scenes where calm was just a prelude to pressure. She turned to face them fully, keeping her posture steady just like her father taught her. "I'm just walking my dog, sir. We live on Maple Hill Drive." Officer Davis stepped forward, his boots crunching the gravel as he approached. He was younger than Riley, maybe mid-30s, square-jawed with a buzz cut that made his head look sharper than it should have. His eyes weren't curious. They were calculating. Valor tensed, not overtly, but Lina felt the shift. The way his weight spread more evenly between his front paws, the way his chest rose just a little higher. Riley leaned on the car door. "That your dog?" "Yes, sir." "He registered?" Davis asked, circling them now. "Yes, sir, he's retired police, K-9 explosive unit," Lina said carefully, pulling herself up a little taller. "Little young to be walking a dog like that alone, aren't you?" Davis tilted his head, lips twisting. Lina didn't answer right away. She didn't want to say that her father was overseas again, that her aunt worked late, that the world didn't always wait until someone was ready. "I walk him every day," she said simply. "He's part of our family." Valor's ears twitched. His eyes locked on Davis. "Got ID?" Riley asked, stepping away from the cruiser. Lina blinked. "I'm 12. "Exactly," Davis muttered. "No ID walking a dog that size. We've had calls about suspicious activity in the neighborhood, big dog, possible threat." Lina's heart thudded. "Valor's never hurt anyone. He's trained not to react unless—" "Unless what?" Davis cut in. "Unless someone gives him a reason," she said, and immediately wished she hadn't. Riley straightened. "That sound like a threat to you?" "No," Lina said quickly. "That's not what I meant. He's not aggressive. He's protective." Davis took another step, too close now. Valor moved, just a foot, just enough to place himself directly in front of Lina. No growl, no snarl, just presence, silent and firm. Davis froze. Riley's hand drifted near his belt. "Control your dog," Davis barked. "He is controlled," Lina said, pulse rising in her throat. "He's doing his job." "This ain't a war zone, kid," Riley snapped. "You don't need a damn soldier walking your streets." Valor didn't flinch. His body stayed low, steady. He wasn't lunging. He wasn't threatening. He was guarding. But they didn't want steady. They wanted submissive. Davis reached toward his belt. "Please," Lina said, stepping slightly forward. "We're not doing anything wrong. We're just walking home." "Step back," Riley warned. "Now." Valor's head shifted just slightly as Lina's foot moved. He followed her, like trained, like always. His shoulder brushed her leg. Riley reached for his holster. "Don't!" Lina shouted. "He's not attacking." To anyone who knew dogs, anyone trained, Valor's stance was textbook protection, passive defense. But to two officers already on edge, looking for a justification, it was enough. Riley shouted, "He's coming up!" "No, he's not!" Lina cried. "He's not!" Everything slowed. Riley's weapon cleared his holster. Valor stood his ground. "Down!" Riley roared. But Lina didn't command Valor. She couldn't. She didn't think she had to. The leash trembled in her hand. Then came the crack. The shot shattered the quiet like a blade. 1 second, there was breath, heat, muscle. The next, there was collapse. Valor jerked mid-step, a sharp twist of body and instinct betrayed. He dropped without sound except the thump of his weight hitting the pavement. Lina screamed. The leash slipped from her hand. "Valor!" she shrieked, falling to her knees. Blood began to spread, thick and dark, across the sidewalk. It soaked into his fur, silver fading to crimson. "He was going to lunge," Riley yelled, trying to justify it before anyone asked. "He moved on us." "He didn't," Lina sobbed. "He didn't. He was just... Across the street, a phone camera clicked to life. Mrs. Ruiz, her silver bun coming loose as she ran barefoot to the edge of her lawn, held the phone with trembling fingers. "I saw it," she whispered to no one in particular. "That dog didn't do a thing." Davis glanced around. "You okay, kid?" Lina didn't answer. She was cradling Valor's head in her lap. His eyes, always so full of presence, were dazed now, blinking slow. His chest heaved. "Help him!" she screamed. "You have to help him!" "He's bleeding out," Riley muttered. "You did this." She turned her tear-streaked face upward. "He was protecting me. That's all he did." Riley's face hardened. "You need to calm down." "I can't," she choked. "I can't feel him breathing." Mrs. Ruiz's voice broke through, stronger now. "They shot a child's dog for standing still," she called out. "You're not covering this up." Riley's eyes darted to her. "Ma'am, this is official police business." "I watched him stand still," she yelled. "That dog didn't bark, didn't bite, didn't lunge. He stood." Valor's tail thumped once against the concrete, a final effort. Then he went still. "No," Lina whispered. "No, no, no." "Ma'am," Davis said quietly, "we need to separate her from the animal." "You touch me," Lina hissed through clenched teeth, "and I will scream so loud this whole block will know your names." Riley stepped back. "Call animal control. Get this wrapped." Lina pressed her forehead to Valor's fur. "You're not just a dog. You're my heart." Distant sirens began to wail, but none of them came for Valor. There is a silence that comes after a gunshot, not the quiet of peace, but the kind of silence that swallows sound, that stretches and twists the world like time has stopped breathing. That was the silence that wrapped around 12-year-old Lina Brooks as she stared at the body of her dog, her protector, her family, crumpled on the blood-slick pavement. Valor wasn't moving. The leash dangled from her hand like a broken thread. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. Just air, just disbelief. Then, "No!" The word tore from her throat with the force of a scream that had been waiting its whole life. "No!" She dropped to her knees beside him, palms hitting the concrete hard enough to scrape, but she didn't notice. She didn't feel it. All she saw was blood. So much blood. "Valor!" she cried, her small hands pressed to the wound, trembling, useless. "Stay with me. Please, please stay." His chest was rising barely, shallow, like the air wasn't sure if it wanted to keep trying. Lina bent over him, her body curling protectively around his frame. "You're okay," she whispered, her voice cracking under the lie. "You're gonna be okay. I've got you. I've got you." Across the street, Mrs. Ruiz had come off her porch, her phone shaking in her grip. She had captured everything: the stance, the stillness, the shot. Her voice, though aged and worn with years, rang clear. "They shot that dog, that child's dog. He wasn't doing anything." But the officers weren't looking at her. Officer Riley reholstered his weapon, a flicker of discomfort crossing his face before he masked it under protocol. Davis, still breathing hard, shook his head. It was justified. The dog was postured for attack. "You're lying," Lina shouted, head snapping up. Her hands were streaked with red. "He wasn't attacking. He was protecting me." "Miss, step away from the animal. Don't touch me." Riley moved toward her. "You need to calm down." "Calm down?" Her voice cracked. "You killed him. He didn't do anything wrong." Valor gave a faint twitch, legs kicking once, weakly, like a dream he couldn't wake from. Lina turned her attention back to him, sobbing now. His eyes found hers, and in them, for the first time in her life, she saw fear. It shattered her. She placed her hand on the side of his face, feeling the damp heat of his breath against her palm. "I'm here," she whispered. "Don't go. Don't leave me." His tail moved just once, a slow, dragging thump on the ground. Then his body slackened, eyes dimmed. And that was it. That was the moment her world collapsed into a single, burning point of grief. "He's gone." Her voice was paper-thin. "You killed him." She bowed over him, rocking slightly, hands pressed to fur that was already cooling. Tears soaked into his coat. Mrs. Ruiz was already on the phone with 911, her voice low but firm. "Yes, I need someone immediately. Police shot a child service dog. No, he wasn't attacking. I saw it all. There's blood. The girl, she's not okay. You need to send someone now." More neighbors had begun to appear. Doors creaked open. Cell phones rose. Someone gasped. Another started recording. The sound of a baby crying drifted from a nearby house, like the neighborhood itself was weeping. Riley noticed the crowd growing. "Call it in," he muttered to Davis. "Get animal control. Say it was a threat incident. Civilian minor. Defensive discharge." Lina raised her head, her face streaked with tears and blood. "His name was Valor," she said hoarsely, "and he saved lives. He saved my life." Riley glanced at her. "I'm sorry you had to see that." "No, you're not," she whispered. And then, like something ancient and terrifying had awakened in her chest, she rose to her feet. Blood smeared her knees. Her NASA t-shirt was stained crimson, the fabric clinging to her small frame. Her fists were clenched, her shoulders shaking, but her eyes were clear. "When my dad finds out," she said, voice shaking with more than just sadness, "he'll come for you." Riley raised a brow. "That a threat, young lady?" "No," Lina said. "It's a promise." The wail of sirens grew louder. Red and blue flashed faintly against the windows of the houses. The world, it seemed, was just now realizing that something irreversible had happened. But Lina already knew. She dropped to her knees again, curling her body over Valor, shielding him from the world like he had done for her every night since her mother died. She pressed her forehead to his neck, trying to memorize the scent that was already fading. "I love you," she whispered. A gentle wind moved through the trees. Leaves shifted. Somewhere a bird sang, like it didn't know the world had changed. And from under Lina's broken breath, just before the paramedics arrived, came the quietest words of all. "You were the only one who never left me." The desert didn't speak. It hummed. Even at dusk, the Arizona air shimmered with heat waves, stretching the highway in melted lines beneath the truck's tires. Ethan Brooks sat behind the wheel of the armored convoy vehicle, one gloved hand resting casually on the wheel, the other scanning the perimeter through thick-tinted sunglasses. 3 security contractors followed in the rear, still joking about a failed drone exercise back at the perimeter line. But Ethan didn't laugh. He rarely did anymore. He checked the side mirror again. Habits didn't die easy. The mission was simple: retrieve data drives from a decommissioned satellite tower, secure the tech team's route, then disappear like ghosts. Ethan had done 1,000 like it since he left the Marines, since the last sandstorm in Kandahar, since the nightmares became routine. His phone buzzed once, then again, urgently. He didn't usually check during runs, but the caller ID wasn't from base. It was Aunt D. His gut tightened. He tapped his earpiece and answered. "Talk to me." Her voice was shaking before the words even made sense. "Ethan, it's Lina." His foot lifted from the gas. "What happened?" "She's alive, but—" Dee choked. "It's Valor. They shot him, right in front of her." Time didn't stop, but the silence that followed felt like it cut through every breath of wind outside the truck. "What?" Ethan said. Calm. Too calm. 2 officers. Crestmoor. She was just walking him. They said it was suspicious activity. He never attacked, never barked, but they shot him anyway. The words sank slowly, like water seeping into dry earth. "Is she hurt?" he asked. "Not physically," Dee whispered, "but she hasn't spoken since. Not to me, not to the responders. She just sat there, holding him." Ethan gripped the steering wheel so tight the leather groaned. Behind him, one of the other contractors cracked a joke through the comms. He didn't hear it. "I'm coming home," he said, already turning the wheel off the road. "Right now." Dee tried to stop him. "You've got another 2 weeks. I don't give a damn about the contract. My daughter just watched her best friend die in front of her. I should have been there." "Ethan, don't blame yourself." But he already did. He ended the call and pulled the vehicle into a dusty turnout, sliding from the cab in one fluid motion. He keyed into command. "Alpha 3, Brooks stepping off rotation. Medical family emergency. Confirmed." The response was a curt copy. He didn't wait. He was already moving duffel bag in hand, firearm stored, boots kicking up dry dust behind him. As the sun bled down over the desert, he threw his gear into the back of a rental truck at the edge of the compound and turned toward the highway. And that's when the silence cracked inside him. Valor. The name punched through every layer of armor he'd built up over years of war, loss, and hardened quiet. That dog wasn't just a pet. He was family, a partner, a soldier. Ethan had worked alongside him for 4 years in Kabul, Kandahar, and Jalalabad. Valor had saved 6 lives from IEDs, had pulled a wounded boy out of a collapsed training compound, had sat beside dying soldiers when medevac couldn't get there in time. When Ethan was honorably discharged, there was only one thing he'd asked for: to bring Valor home. And he did. He brought him home to Lina, who had just lost her mother. He placed Valor's leash in her hand like it was sacred. "Take care of him," he'd told her. "I will," she'd promised. And she had. They were inseparable. They grew up together in grief, in laughter, in silence. He had watched Lina fall asleep with her arm draped over Valor's chest so many nights. Had seen how the dog calmed her night terrors, how his very breath became her anchor. And now, he was gone. Shot. In front of her. Ethan's jaw clenched hard enough to ache. He could feel it building inside, something old and dark. Not recklessness, not vengeance. Something sharper, focused. He drove through the night, past flickering truck stops and the glow of distant cities, the road stretching ahead like a promise he intended to keep. Every mile felt like a failure he had to outrun. He didn't cry. He didn't scream. He just drove, with the memory of a leash in his hand and a girl's laugh in the back seat of his mind. The sun was just cresting the skyline by the time he crossed into Crestmoor's outskirts. The town looked unchanged, like it hadn't been the site of trauma just 2 days earlier. But Ethan knew better. He pulled into the driveway of their quiet, 2-bedroom house and killed the engine. Dee opened the door before he knocked. "She hasn't left her room," she whispered. He nodded, dropped the bag, walked straight in. Lina was curled in Valor's bed. Not beside it, not on the couch, in it. She wore the same clothes from the day it happened. Her knees were scabbed, her hair tangled. Her face was blank, no tears left to cry. Ethan knelt slowly beside her. She didn't look at him. He placed his hand over hers, gently. "Hey, baby girl." Silence. He didn't push. He just sat there. Because grief didn't need fixing. It needed company. He looked around the room, the drawings, the medals, the framed photo of Valor in uniform next to Lina in a red hoodie. Then his eyes dropped to the spot where the leash used to hang. Empty. He stood slowly, walked into the kitchen, and poured water into the bowl that still sat on the floor. He left it there. Then walked outside and stood on the blood-stained sidewalk where it had happened, where his promise had died. "I'm sorry," he whispered. Then louder, "I will not let this disappear." The house was too quiet. Not the kind of quiet that meant peace. This quiet had teeth. It gnawed at the walls and crept under doors, clung to corners like fog that wouldn't lift. It was the kind of silence that followed something broken, something taken that no one could replace. Ethan stood at the doorway to Lina's room. She hadn't moved. Not much, anyway. She sat cross-legged on the floor beside Valor's bed, tracing the edges of a worn tennis ball with her fingertip. Her eyes were open, but she wasn't really looking at anything. The air around her felt like glass too fragile to disturb. He stepped in slowly. "I made pancakes," he said, voice gentle. No answer. "Still your favorite," he tried again, crouching down to her level. She blinked once, but that was all. The dog bed beside her looked untouched since Valor's last night. The blanket still had a few coarse black hairs clinging to the fibers. His collar sat in the corner, tag silent, gleam dulled by dried tears and time that hadn't passed long enough. Ethan's throat tightened. He reached for the collar, but her hand darted out, stopping him. He paused. She didn't speak, just shook her head. "I wasn't going to take it," he said softly. "I just wanted to feel the weight of it." She looked down again, silent, distant. 1,000 miles away, even though she was right there. Ethan sat on the floor beside her. No words now. Just presence. He didn't reach out, didn't push. Grief, he knew, had to come to you when it was ready. And this grief, it was deep, sharper than anything he'd faced in combat. He had held dying soldiers in his arms, watched light leave their eyes. But nothing prepared him for this, watching his daughter fall apart, not from violence done to her, but from the violence done to someone she loved. From the kitchen, the clock ticked. Tick, tick, tick. He finally stood, kissed the top of her head, and left the room as quietly as he'd come in. Down the hall, the living room was still cluttered with Valor's things, his leash, the harness with the faded police canine patch, the tin box of training treats, all untouched. Ethan stepped outside. The morning was gray. Not stormy, but the kind of gray that felt like the sky had given up pretending. He walked 3 blocks in silence, past Mrs. Ruiz's house, her blinds slightly drawn, but he could see the faint flicker of her TV. She'd been the only one brave enough to speak up, the only one who stayed, who held her phone steady even when her hands shook. The sidewalk up ahead still bore the faint outline. They had tried to wash it. The city had come through, power-hosed it twice. But some things don't rinse clean. A few dark stains still soaked the cracks, subtle, but there. A memory etched in pavement. Injustice has a way of leaving shadows, even when no one wants to see them. Ethan stood over the spot. He could almost see it. Lina on her knees, clutching Valor's body, screaming into the sky as officers argued about protocol. His hands clenched into fists. He knelt slowly and placed one hand against the concrete. Cold. Still. "I told you I'd keep her safe," he whispered, voice low, steady. "And you did more than anyone ever could. You gave everything." The wind shifted. He closed his eyes. "She's not okay," he added, barely audible. "And I won't let this fade into some file marked justified." He stood, spine straightening like steel had returned to it. "This won't be buried," he said aloud. "Not you, not her, not what they did." A passing car slowed. He turned, met the driver's eye through the window. A man in a postal uniform. He gave a tight nod, respectful. A silent acknowledgement of what the town was already whispering. Valor wasn't just a dog. He was a line that had been crossed. Ethan walked back home with purpose. Inside, he opened his laptop, pulled up Valor's service files, his deployment record, medical history, training certifications, letters of commendation, every document that proved who Valor was. And then he opened a second file. Officer Davis, Officer Riley, complaints, excessive force records, community reports buried beneath lack of evidence lines. They thought this would disappear. They didn't know Ethan Brooks. He had buried brothers in the sand, had stood before flags and coffins, had seen what honor looked like and what cowardice tried to cover up. This was personal now. This wasn't about revenge, it was about a promise. In the hallway, he heard movement. Lina had shifted. He didn't go to her yet. Instead, he turned Valor's collar in his hand, ran his thumb over the worn engraving. Valor, service, loyalty, family. He placed it beside her empty cereal bowl on the counter, just in reach, just in sight. Then he got to work. The report arrived 2 days later. It came in a plain manila envelope, dropped into the mailbox like it was just another piece of recycled paper. No knock. No signature required. Just silence. Like they already knew the answer written inside and hoped he'd read it in private, grit his teeth, and move on like every other grieving man before him. Ethan didn't open it at the kitchen table. He waited until Lina was asleep, if you could call that haunted stillness sleep. He poured a cup of bitter black coffee and took the envelope out to the back porch, where Valor used to rest under the old swing. The first word hit him like a sucker punch. Justified. One word, one verdict, one erasure. The rest of the report was bureaucratic noise, perceived threat posture, verbal commands issued. Handler failed to restrain. Dog responded aggressively to law enforcement presence. He read it all, every single line, and when he was done he folded it carefully and placed it beside his mug untouched. He didn't slam the table, didn't scream. But something inside him, something forged in war zones and buried beneath years of trying to be just a dad, clicked into place. He went back inside, quietly, and pulled out a locked case from the closet. Not weapons, not gear, files. He opened a worn folder marked Valor Deployment Records. Every mission logged, Every successful search, photos, commendations, even a letter from a colonel stating, "Without K-9 Valor, 3 lives would have been lost on March 11th." Ethan read through the pages like scripture. Proof not just of Valor's loyalty, but of his restraint. This was a dog that had walked calmly through gunfire, ignored screams, stayed by the side of wounded men without flinching. And yet, they called him aggressive. He picked up his phone and began digging. The Crestmoor PD website had a civilian complaint portal, buried 3 clicks deep. He pulled Officer Davis's personnel ID and searched. There were 5 listed complaints in the past 3 years, 3 of them involving minority families. All closed, all marked no action. He tried Riley. 2 incidents, both sealed, but one name stood out. A. Santiago, 2020. He jotted it down, then he cross-checked it with local news clippings. Found nothing, no media coverage, no follow-up, of course. He leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. This wasn't just negligence, this was pattern. He opened a new file on his desktop. Valor, the case they buried. He began collecting everything: body cam request forms, dispatch logs, Valor's full K-9 certification from Fort Benning, training evaluations, testimony from their handler in Kabul. And then he found the footage from Mrs. Ruiz. She had sent it that morning, quietly, with no message, just a link and the words, "They lied. This is the truth." It wasn't long, 37 seconds, but it was enough. The officers had approached. Lina had backed up, visibly scared. Valor hadn't lunged, hadn't barked, had stood between her and the men like a sentry. Ears forward, muscles tense, but still. Then the flash, the scream, the collapse. Ethan closed his eyes, burned the sequence into memory, and then saved it 3 times on cloud, on drive, on encrypted backup. He turned off the lights in his office, the monitor casting cold blue shadows across the walls. The house was asleep, but his mind was burning. He sat for a long while, just staring at the name Valor on the screen. "You gave your life for her," he said quietly. "Now I'll give mine for the truth." He reached for the leather band on his wrist. It was old, weathered from the field, stained from a time he never spoke about. On the inside, etched with a knife in Kabul, were the words, "Protect what you leave behind." He had carved it the day he held Valor's discharge papers and walked him onto the tarmac back home. That promise hadn't expired, and it never would. He rose slowly like someone preparing for battle, not with bullets, but with facts, with paper, with voices that had been silenced for too long. It started now. The office smelled like old coffee and quiet resignation. Ethan sat across from Naomi Keller in a narrow, windowless room at the Crestmoor Municipal Building. The Civilian Complaint Division shared its space with licensing services and code enforcement, a layout that felt deliberate, like truth was just another form to misfile. Naomi leaned over a battered desktop, typing steadily. Her fingers were fast but precise, each keystroke deliberate. Her voice, though calm, carried a current of practiced rage beneath every word. "We're requesting an external investigation," she said, eyes not leaving the screen. "Given the conflict of interest with the department's own officers. I'm citing federal precedent from the Whitaker ruling. If they bury this, they'll know we're watching." Ethan nodded. He didn't trust the system, not anymore. But Naomi had come highly recommended, a civil rights lawyer with a record of winning cases no one else would touch. She didn't flinch when he showed her the footage. She just said, "Let's make it official." So here they were. He slid over Valor's training certification. Her brow furrowed. K-9 Valor, multiple overseas deployments, no history of aggression. She shook her head. This isn't just about negligence, it's willful erasure. Ethan placed the printed stills from Mrs. Ruiz's video on the table. Valor's body, shielding Lina, the officer's mid-step, weapons still raised. These, he said, they tell the truth. Naomi reached for the complaint form, filled now with digital evidence and eyewitness statements. Once I file this, she warned, they'll push back. Hard. You ready? I was a Marine, he said flatly. They've already taken everything else. She didn't smile, but she nodded. He signed the form, and that's when the wait began. 3 days. That's all it took. 72 hours after Naomi submitted the complaint, the response came back through the online portal. No call, no explanation. Just a status change. Case closed. He clicked the link. A PDF loaded. Use of force deemed appropriate. K-9 subject was deemed aggressive. Officer followed protocol in defense of perceived threat. No mention of Valor's military history, no mention of Lina, no reference to the video. It was like none of it had happened. Just one cold summary. No further investigation warranted. Ethan stared at the screen for a long time. Naomi was already calling someone, her voice low but sharp. Yes, I'm looking at the ruling now. No independent review, no forensic reconstruction. They didn't even subpoena the footage. Are you kidding me? Ethan didn't speak. He scrolled through the reason for closure section. It was boilerplate, copy-paste damage control. One phrase stood out. K-9 failed to comply with verbal command. He leaned back, exhaling through his teeth. He was a dog, he muttered, not a criminal. Naomi hung up. They wanted this gone before Monday's press cycle. Standard move. Paper trail says justice was served. Meanwhile, no one talks. Ethan shook his head slowly. What happens now? He asked. Naomi opened her legal pad, scribbled 2 names. I request records from Internal Affairs. You go public. He frowned. With what? She looked him straight in the eye. The truth. Their version only survives if yours stays quiet. He didn't answer, but she saw it in his eyes, that military stillness, the kind that didn't blink when things got personal. He tried reaching out to the media. Local affiliates didn't respond. One station said they'd circle back. Another sent a polite rejection. Unfortunately, this incident doesn't align with our current coverage priorities. He sent the footage anyway. Still nothing. Online forums buried his posts under arguments about dangerous breeds and officer safety. One comment read, should have kept the mutt on a leash. Another, play stupid games, win stupid prizes. He closed the browser. Every headline was about something else. Elections, traffic cams, a new mall opening in the next county. But not Valor, not Lina, not the fact that a decorated K-9 was gunned down in a peaceful suburb and no one would say his name. That night, he stood in the hallway outside Lina's room. The door was cracked. She was sitting on her bed, staring at an empty corner where Valor's crate used to be. Her drawing pad sat in her lap, untouched. He wanted to tell her what happened, that they said it was justified, that no one would be punished. But he couldn't. Because what do you tell a child whose whole world just got rewritten as a footnote? Instead, he walked back into the office and began organizing. He printed the full report and highlighted the contradictions. He mapped out the timeline of the shooting. He pinned Valor's records beside the body cam request denial. And at the center of it all, he taped a photo of Lina, her face streaked with dried tears, arms wrapped around Valor's still body. A war room of grief and facts. If they wanted silence, he'd give them the opposite. He picked up the marker and wrote 3 words in bold above the timeline. This isn't over. The knock came just before noon. 3 sharp raps. Official. Too practiced to be anything but government. Ethan stood from his desk, instinct sharpening. He passed through the living room, caught a glimpse of Lina sketching quietly in the corner, head down, headphones on. Her shoulders barely moved. She hadn't smiled in days. He opened the front door. 2 figures stood outside, both wearing business casual discomfort like armor. A woman in her 40s with a clipboard and carefully measured smile. A younger man with wary eyes and a badge clipped to his belt. "Mr. Brooks?" the woman asked. "That's me," Ethan replied evenly. She offered her hand. "I'm Agent Renee Morris. This is Agent Lowell. We're with DCFS, Department of Child and Family Services." He didn't shake, just nodded once. "We received an anonymous report expressing concern for the welfare of your daughter, Lina," she continued, voice smooth, "specifically citing emotional instability in the home and possible PTSD-related outbursts." Ethan blinked, once, slowly, then stepped aside. "Come in." They crossed the threshold with professional unease, taking stock of the home photos on the wall, dishes drying in the rack, Valor's collar resting silently on the mantel. "Would you like to speak with her?" he asked, calm on the surface. "Eventually," Agent Morris replied. "But first, we'd like to speak with you." Ethan gestured to the dining table. They sat. He didn't. Agent Lowell cleared his throat. "We're aware of the recent incident involving your family." "You mean the shooting," Ethan corrected, "where a decorated K-9 was gunned down in front of a 12-year-old girl." Silence. Agent Morris shifted. "Yes, that one. It's under review." "No," Ethan said. "It's been closed, labeled justified. You can say it." She paused, regrouping. "We're not here to relitigate that. But in cases of potential trauma, especially involving minors, our office is obligated to follow up." The anonymous tip referenced concern about emotional outbursts, militarized behavior, and retaliatory language. Ethan's eyes narrowed. "Retaliatory?" "Yes," she said gently. "Comments made in front of the child regarding revenge, war, and potential threats toward law enforcement." Ethan folded his arms. "Have you reviewed my military record?" "We're aware you're a former Marine," Agent Lowell offered, almost apologetically. "Decorated, honorably discharged, clean history, no criminal record, no domestic complaints." They nodded. "And did your anonymous source mention that Lina hasn't spoken more than 10 words since the shooting?" Another pause. Morris offered a sympathetic tilt of the head. "Children sometimes mimic stress they observe in parents." Ethan leaned in, voice dropping an octave. Not angry, just deadly still. "You think I'm the danger in this house?" She didn't answer. He let the silence hang, then straightened. "You want to speak with Lina? You'll do it here. I stay in the room, and you won't twist a word out of her to fit a narrative that lets killers walk free." Agent Lowell glanced at his colleague, then nodded. "That's acceptable." Ethan turned toward the living room. "Lina," he said gently, "can you come here a minute?" She appeared at the doorway seconds later, clutching her sketch pad like a shield. Her eyes flicked to the strangers, then to her father. He gave her a calm nod. The agents softened their tone. "Hi, Lina. I'm Renee. This is Evan. We just wanted to make sure you're okay." Mind if we ask you a few things?" Lina said nothing. She walked over, sat beside Ethan, and opened her sketch pad. On the page was a rough, shaky drawing of Valor, standing tall in front of a faceless figure holding a gun. Behind him a girl curled into a ball. Morris tried to hide the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. "Lina," she said carefully, "do you feel safe at home?" Lina kept drawing, didn't look up. "Do you feel scared around your dad?" Still silence. But then Lina did something unexpected. She turned the sketch pad around and slid it toward them. There, in small letters under the image, she had written, "He saved me. Twice." Agent Lowell exhaled slowly. Morris closed her clipboard. "Thank you, Lina. That's very helpful." Ethan watched their posture change, no longer probing, just eager to leave. As they stood, he walked them to the door. "We may follow up," Morris said. "You do that," Ethan replied. "But next time, come with a warrant, or come with truth." Lowell hesitated before stepping out. "Mr. Brooks, off the record, this kind of visit usually doesn't happen unless someone wants to rattle you." "I know," Ethan said. They left. He closed the door quietly, then turned and punched the wall beside the frame hard. The drywall cracked beneath his knuckles, but he didn't feel it. They weren't just ignoring the truth. They were targeting it. They were targeting her. He walked into his office, sat at the desk, and added 2 more names to the board. Morris, Lowell. Whether pawns or players, they were now part of it. The cemetery was tucked behind a grove of cottonwoods on the edge of town, where the road narrowed into gravel, and the wind always carried the faint scent of pine and memory. Ethan parked the truck and turned off the engine. The silence that followed was heavy, not uncomfortable, just full, as if the very air knew better than to intrude. Lina sat in the passenger seat, arms wrapped tightly around her sketchbook. She hadn't said a word the entire ride. He didn't ask her to. He was just glad she came. Together, they walked the path through dew-damp grass until they reached a simple headstone, unmarked by any formal emblem, but etched with care by the hands of someone who had owed everything. Valor K9, protector, friend, family. He never left his post. Lina stood still. Her boots sank slightly into the soft earth. Ethan took a respectful step back and let her have the space. For a moment all was still. And then her voice, small, hoarse, and heartbreakingly fragile, broke through the quiet. "I let go." Her hand trembled as it reached for the headstone. She traced the letters like they were still warm. "If I had held tighter, if I hadn't been scared, you'd still be here." She sniffled, wiped her nose with her sleeve, and knelt down, folding herself into the earth like it was the only thing that would listen. "You were just trying to help," she whispered. "You didn't even bark. You just stood there." A breath, then another. "I heard the bang before I saw it. I felt it in my chest." Ethan's throat tightened, but he stayed back. This wasn't a moment for fixing. It was a moment for breaking, gently, truthfully. "You didn't even cry out," Lina continued. "You just looked at me, like you were sorry, like you were still worried about me." She wiped her eyes and pressed her forehead gently to the stone. "I'm the one who should be sorry." Ethan stepped forward then, just far enough to be heard. "It wasn't your fault, baby girl." She didn't turn around. "I let go," she repeated. He crouched beside her, slow and steady, hands resting on his knees. "And I trained him to never let go of you," he said softly. "That was my promise, not yours." She looked up then, eyes red, cheeks blotched, voice cracking. "Why would they kill him, Dad? He didn't do anything." He felt it then, that invisible fracture deep in his chest, the one he'd held together through war zones and funerals, the one that no bullet had touched. It broke, because there was no answer he could give her that wasn't poisoned by the truth. "I don't know," he whispered. "I wish I did." She buried her face into his jacket, sobbing quietly, like she was trying to hold back the world but couldn't anymore. He held her. He didn't try to rush it, didn't try to hush her, just let her cry into his chest while the wind rustled gently through the trees above them. After a long time, her voice returned. Just a whisper. "I don't want to forget him." "You won't," Ethan said. "Not ever. I want to draw him every day. Then you will. And I want to tell people what he did, what he was like, that he was good." Ethan nodded. "Then we'll make sure they hear." She pulled back just enough to look him in the eye. "They called him dangerous." "I know," he said. "But you and I, we know who he really was. And that's what matters." She reached into her sketchbook and pulled out a new drawing, Valor, in pencil and charcoal. Eyes calm, stance proud, standing between a small girl and a wall of looming shadows. She slid it under a stone beside the grave. "He always stood in the way," she whispered, "even when it hurt." Ethan felt a tear slide down his own cheek unnoticed. He placed a hand on the headstone. "He still is." As they stood to leave, Lina took one last glance at the grave. Then she whispered, just loud enough for the wind to carry, "Thank you for saving me." And for the first time in days, Ethan saw it. A small light in her eyes, dim but real. A thread of something beyond grief. Not healing. Not yet. But maybe hope. They walked back to the truck in silence. But this time, it wasn't empty. It was sacred. The ink on the incident report wasn't even dry when Officer Theo Marsh knew something wasn't right. He sat alone in the precinct's auxiliary break room. Small, windowless, fluorescent-lit, flipping through the printout Riley had shoved onto his desk an hour earlier. Subject: officer-involved discharge. Canine was deemed aggressive. Officer Davis responded per protocol. Lies. Thin, shaky lies. He had been there. Not close enough to stop it, but close enough to see how it unfolded. How the dog hadn't lunged. How the girl hadn't screamed until after the shot. How Riley's voice, low and egging, had pushed everything toward ignition. He had been on the outer perimeter when the call went out. Suspicious youth, possible threat, Crestmoor, west. By the time he arrived, Valor was already down. Lina was cradling the dog's body, blood soaking her hoodie, her mouth open in a scream that didn't even sound human. Marsh had frozen. He was trained for chaos, but not that kind. Not the kind where the enemy wore the same badge. He closed the report now, his jaw locked. The words echoed in his mind. Canine failed to comply. What the hell does that even mean? Later that evening, the precinct settled into its usual hum. Phones ringing, radios crackling, jokes traded over vending machines. Like nothing had happened. Riley strutted through the halls with the smug gait of someone untouchable. Davis trailed behind him, quieter but no less confident. Marsh stayed at his desk, head down, pretending to work while their voices bounced down the corridor. "Kid was twitchy," Riley was saying. "Dog stepped forward. I saw teeth. Had to act." "Yeah," Davis replied, more hesitant. "It happened fast. Split second." Riley clapped him on the back. "We wrote it clean. I'll handle the rest." They turned a corner and vanished. Marsh stared at his keyboard. There had been no teeth, no growl, no bark, just that German shepherd stepping forward, calm, alert, body angled slightly between the girl and the officers. Marsh had seen dogs on duty. He knew the difference between aggression and protection. Valor had been protecting her, and they had killed him for it. The surveillance system in the building was old, but Marsh knew how to navigate it. That night, long after most had gone home, he pulled up the internal review file's body cam footage, radio logs, GPS timestamps. He had no authority to access it. He did it anyway. The body cam footage had gaps, abrupt cuts, missing seconds. But what remained was damning. You could see Lina's hands up. You could hear Riley say, "Put the dog down." You could see Davis raise his gun before the dog moved. The shot came too fast, too clean, then static, then silence. Marsh leaned back in his chair, the glow of the screen casting long shadows on his face. He felt sick. This wasn't just bad policing. This was a setup. He didn't sleep that night. At home, his apartment felt too quiet, the air stale. His uniform itched like it didn't belong to him. He paced, made tea he didn't drink, sat by the window, and watched the night bleed into morning. A question clawed at him. If I stay silent, who am I helping? And the darker one beneath it. If I speak, what happens to me? Because Riley wasn't just a rogue cop. He was connected, had friends up the chain. Marsh had seen how complaints vanished, how files got misplaced, how witnesses were discredited before they ever got a word out. He'd watched it happen for years. But this time, it was different. A little girl lost her best friend, and a man's reputation, a hero's legacy, was being rewritten in ink that smelled like rot. At 3:12 a.m., he logged into an encrypted burner email he kept for emergencies. He began to type, "Mr. Brooks, you don't know me, but I was there. Your dog didn't attack anyone. The report is false. They're trying to bury it, like they've done before. Meet me. No police, no reporters. Just you and the truth." A friend who wore the same badge. He stared at the screen for a long time, then clicked send. He knew what that meant. He couldn't take it back, couldn't unknow the truth, couldn't keep pretending this uniform made him one of the good guys just by wearing it. From now on, he would have to earn it. It was the kind of diner that existed in every town and belonged to none-cheap tile floors, peeling menus, and coffee that tasted like it had been brewed through regret. But the booths offered just enough distance from the world to make a meeting like this possible. Ethan arrived 5 minutes early. He didn't sit. He scanned. Corner booth, far side. Clear line to the exit. No mirrors, no badge-carrying uniforms in sight. When the bell above the door jingled, he turned. The man who entered wasn't old, but he wore exhaustion like a second skin. Uniform replaced with jeans, a hoodie, and the look of someone who'd stopped sleeping well a long time ago. Theo Marsh. Ethan recognized the gate law enforcement, but not cocky, nervous, hesitant. They locked eyes. Marsh nodded once, then slid into the corner booth without a word. Ethan joined him, silent. The space between them was thick with unsaid things. A waitress approached, gum snapping. "Coffee?" They both nodded. She poured and vanished, uninterested. Ethan waited. Marsh spoke first. "I was there. I saw what happened. I couldn't stop it." Ethan said nothing. He just stared. Marsh lowered his eyes. "They said Valor lunged. Said your daughter lost control. That he growled, bared teeth. None of that happened. I know you already knew that, but you need to hear it from someone who wore the same badge." Ethan exhaled slowly, jaw tight. "Why now?" Marsh took a shaky sip of coffee. "Because I couldn't sleep. Because I have a little sister who's 10, and I couldn't look her in the eye after that report went out." Ethan leaned in slightly. "What aren't they telling the public?" Marsh swallowed hard. "Riley's not just a racist hothead with a badge. He's careful. Strategic. The girl and the dog. That wasn't random. It was controlled escalation. He wanted a confrontation. He wanted a reason." Ethan's fingers curled around his mug, white-knuckled. "Why?" Marsh glanced around. Once, twice, then leaned in low. "Because you embarrassed him. Years ago. Afghanistan. I dug around. You filed a report. Civilian abuse. Got him discharged dishonorably." Ethan's blood ran cold. He hadn't connected the dots, not fully. Not until now. "And now he's back," Marsh said. "Different uniform. Same cruelty. Only now, he's got cover. And a network." Ethan's voice dropped. "Davis? Follower. Not a mastermind, but complicit." Ethan stared out the window for a beat, eyes distant. "They came after my daughter." "I know. They labeled my dog dangerous. They've done it before," Marsh added quietly. "Minority families, military backgrounds, dogs too. You're not the first. You're just the one who's fighting back." Ethan's eyes returned to Marsh. "Why tell me this?" Marsh looked ashamed. "Because I can't fix what happened. But maybe I can stop what comes next." Ethan studied him carefully, coldly. "You understand what you're doing by talking to me, right?" Marsh nodded. "This will end your career," Ethan said. "Maybe," Marsh answered. "But if staying silent means helping men like Riley keep their power, then I don't want this badge anyway." Ethan's stare softened barely. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small voice recorder. "Mind if I record the next part?" Marsh hesitated, then nodded. Ethan clicked it on and set it between them. "Start from the top," he said. "Everything you know. Everything you saw." And as the coffee cooled and the shadows lengthened across the diner floor, a story began to unfold. A story of betrayal, of cover-ups, of a man in uniform who had turned his authority into a weapon and had finally picked the wrong target. Naomi Keller's office was barely wide enough for 2 chairs and a desk, but the walls told a louder story, lined with framed headlines from civil rights victories, faded protest photos, and a calendar permanently turned to the day George Floyd died. She didn't smile when Ethan arrived. She just pushed a mug of black coffee across the desk and said, "If we're doing this, we're doing it right." Ethan sat, jaw tight. "Marsh gave me enough to crack it open. Now we need the rest." Naomi nodded and slid her laptop closer. Her fingers moved fast command lines, bypass portals, department logins, a quiet defiance born from years of watching systems rigged to erase the very people she fought for. "I got this through a whistleblower out of internal affairs," she muttered, "buried in a backup server, not part of the standard report pipeline." She clicked open a file titled Community Preservation Intel, Crestmoor, Confidential. The first page wasn't a report. It was a map. Colored pins, yellow, red, blue. Red dots, Naomi said, tapping one cluster, are dog-related fatalities, every single one within minority neighborhoods, majority military families. Most of them occurred within 1 to 3 weeks of noise complaints, suspicious activity calls, or anonymous tips filed through the precinct. Ethan leaned in, studying the data. Valor wasn't the first. Naomi's eyes darkened. He was the most public. She flipped to the next tab. Incident reports. Dog, German Shepherd. Owner, Army Sergeant. Dog, Belgian Malinois. Owner, Navy Corpsman. Dog, Labrador Retriever. Owner, black female veteran, discharged 2016. All reported aggressive. All shot. No internal discipline filed. Each report closed in under 96 hours. And that's just the dogs, Naomi added grimly. Now look at this. She opened a table labeled Family Removals, DCFS Coordination. Ethan's fists clenched as he read. Veteran family flagged unstable. Anonymous tip about mental health. PTSD cited in risk assessment. Child removed. Pet neutralized. Case closed. They're weaponizing the system, he muttered. The same one we served to protect. Naomi's jaw tensed. They want these families gone. Off the block. Out of Crestmoor. They're using bureaucracy like a scalpel cutting out anyone who doesn't fit the mold. Ethan looked up. This isn't rogue behavior. This is coordinated. She nodded. And deeply embedded. Look at the dates. These aren't months apart. They're stacked, one after another. Target, strike, bury. Ethan's voice was low, dangerous. This is ethnic cleansing in slow motion. Naomi didn't flinch. With badges and forms instead of fire and knives. He stared at the file decades of loyalty, obedience, and service curling into ashes inside his chest. Valor's photo was attached to one of the final entries. Date stamped. Filed. Closed. He's just a line in a system, Ethan whispered. No, Naomi said. He's the line we draw. The one we don't let them cross again. Ethan looked at her, really looked. How much danger are we in if we go public? Naomi didn't blink. All of it. He took a breath. Let it settle deep. Then we'd better start getting loud. The box had been sealed for years, dust-coated, corner-torn, shoved to the back of the attic like a memory too heavy to burn but too painful to keep close. Ethan hadn't opened it since the day they folded Valor's retirement papers and handed him over like a final salute. But tonight, the silence in the house was too loud. Lina had fallen asleep on the couch, curled up in the blanket Valor used to pull off the laundry line when it stormed. She didn't speak anymore, not to him, not to herself, just existed, floating somewhere between presence and memory. Ethan needed something, anything that could connect the dots Marsh and Naomi had begun drawing. He pried the box open with a crowbar. Inside, dog tags, old unit patches, handwritten letters from men who never made it back. A lock of fur, pressed between 2 slips of paper with Lina's kindergarten scrawl. To Valor, best friend, always. And then he saw it, a photograph, half crumpled, dusty but intact. Afghanistan, 2011, a forward operating base. Sunset in the background. 8 Marines kneeling around a table made of sandbags and laughter. Ethan in the center, Valor just behind him, tongue out and ears perked. And to the far left, a face Ethan hadn't expected to see again. Riley. No mistaking him. Same square jaw, same cocky lean. But the eyes, they hadn't changed. Cold, calculating, hollow. Ethan turned the photo over. A date, a list of names. One circled twice in faded red pen. Sergeant Daniel Riley, Section 3C. His hand trembled. He remembered now why Riley had disappeared mid-tour. Not injury, not reassignment. Discharge, dishonorable. Ethan had filed the report himself. He could still hear the girl's scream, muffled through a cracked wall in the village of Sangan. Riley, dragging a civilian boy by the shirt, laughing as the interpreter begged him to stop. Ethan had stepped in, pushed Riley against the Humvee, told him it was over. Riley spat at his feet and said, "You think that badge makes you better than me?" Ethan filed the paperwork that night, and Riley vanished. No court-martial, no press. Just gone. Until now. Ethan gripped the photo so hard it crumpled in his fist. His breath came slow, then harsh. Valor had sensed it. The moment Riley approached Lina, the dog remembered, even if no one else did. He rose from the floor, knuckles scraped from digging through time, walked to his office, pulled out the black notebook where he tracked every move since the shooting. He wrote in block letters across a clean page. Riley wasn't just angry, he was hunting. And we were the mark. For the first time, Ethan didn't just feel grief, he felt hunted. And now, finally, he knew why. The morning after Ethan found the photo, the house felt colder. Not the kind of cold that came from weather, but from foresight, from the tightening sense that danger wasn't just coming, it was circling. He moved through the house like a soldier again. Not a father, not a grieving man, a man clearing a perimeter. He started in the front yard, checked sight lines, calculated angles. His hands moved on instinct, measuring distances from windows, noting blind spots, determining optimal lens height. Then he opened the black case he'd buried in the crawl space the day Valor came home for good. Inside, a compact field surveillance kit, 2 pinhole cameras, motion-activated audio, wireless transmitter, redundant SD backups. Tools he told himself he'd never need again. He installed one camera above the porch light, disguised within the hollow of a fake wasp nest. Another beneath the garden gnome Lina had once painted for Valor, its chipped grin now aimed squarely at the walkway. Microphones were woven through the slats of the porch swing. Backup power routed through a disconnected sprinkler line. It wasn't paranoia. It was proof in waiting. Inside the house, he covered the windows with blackout curtains and hard-mounted a GoPro in the corner of the living room. He sat on the edge of the couch for a moment, staring at the empty space where Valor's bed used to be. Lina's voice had not returned, but she watched him move, silent, observant. She sat in the hallway with her sketch pad on her lap. She wasn't drawing, she was listening. He met her eyes, and for the first time since the shot, she gave him a small nod, as if to say, "Do it, Dad." Ethan turned back to the laptop. He opened a secure channel to a city complaint portal. It was the same system Marsh had flagged in Naomi's file, dumped the one used for anonymous neighborhood reports. He drafted a false tip. Suspicious activity at 44 Grandin Ave. Male individual seen at 2 a.m. carrying multiple items in and out of trunk. History of mental health issues, possibly armed. Child inside residence. He attached a blurred image of himself from behind, taken the day before. No weapon. Just ambiguity. He clicked submit, then he waited. He didn't have to wait long. 2 nights later, just past 1:17 a.m., the sound of gravel shifting. Not sirens. Unmarked car, no lights, no announcements. Ethan had fallen asleep in a chair by the front door, still dressed, still ready. His breath stilled as headlights cut briefly through the edge of the blinds. He checked the live feed on his tablet. 2 figures, one taller, one heavier. Riley and Davis. No body cams, no warrants, just flashlights and fists. They approached the porch slowly, like hunters who'd cornered something. Riley knocked once. Hard. Ethan didn't answer. Riley stepped back, nodded to Davis, and began unsnapping his holster. Ethan hit record across all 4 devices, and then he opened the door. "Evening," he said. Riley smiled without warmth. "Got a call. Report of strange activity here." "Strange how?" Riley's eyes flicked inside. "Unstable vet. Minor child in danger." Ethan crossed his arms. "You have a warrant?" Riley didn't answer. Davis moved toward the doorframe. Ethan didn't flinch, but his stance shifted. Subtle. Controlled. He let them inside. "Search all you want," he said. "Nothing to hide?" Riley stepped in first, looked around, slow, calculated. "Place looks cleaner than expected," he muttered. "Sorry to disappoint." Davis wandered toward the kitchen, hand resting a little too close to his weapon. Riley stood in the middle of the room and leaned in close. "You think you're clever, Brooks, filing complaints, getting lawyers. But let me remind you, we own the narrative." Ethan didn't blink. "That's what you said in Afghanistan, too." The color drained from Riley's face. "Careful." "I was careful," Ethan said coldly. "That's why you got discharged instead of court-martialed." Riley's jaw ticked. "That dog was a threat. He was smarter than you." Without warning, Riley shoved Ethan backward against the wall. "You pull another stunt," Riley hissed. "You won't have a front door left to hide behind." Davis pulled him back with a muttered warning. "Let's go." Riley paused, then smirked. "See you soon, Sergeant." The door slammed behind them. Ethan waited until the car was gone before checking the feeds. Crystal clear, audio clean, faces visible, words undeniable. He copied the files. 2 backups, one to Naomi, one to an offline drive hidden inside Valor's old food container. He stood in the middle of his living room, heart pounding, breath steady. They'd come to intimidate, but they left a confession. And now the hunt had turned. The house was dark again, but this time by design. Ethan had unscrewed the porch light, turned off hallway lamps, draped the windows just enough to suggest emptiness, but not so much as to appear staged. He left the front door unlocked. The bait had been taken once. Tonight he was sure they'd come back angry, and that meant careless. Lina was safely at Naomi's, tucked under the care of someone who could keep her out of reach. Ethan had told her they were running tests on the house. She didn't ask what kind. She just hugged him tight before leaving. No words, just that look haunted, heavy, and trusting. Now he sat alone in the living room, in the same chair Valor once claimed every night, near the old food bowl still stationed at the corner. He waited. It came at 2:11 a.m. No knock this time, just a boot. The door flung open with a crash that echoed through the walls. Ethan didn't move. The cameras were rolling pinhole lenses embedded in smoke detectors, thermostats, and one inside the base of a table lamp. Riley entered first, flashlight off, weapon holstered but hand twitching at the ready. Davis followed. No radio, no protocol. Just adrenaline and threat. Ethan stood slowly, arms raised. "You're trespassing," he said quietly. "You made this personal," Riley spat. Filing fake tips, baiting us into your games. You think that'll save your kid?" Ethan didn't answer. Riley stepped closer. "You don't get to walk away clean. Men like me, we survive while heroes like you get buried." And then it happened. A crack to the ribs. Fast. Calculated. A strike with the heel of his palm meant to wind but not mark. Ethan staggered but didn't fight back. "I'm unarmed," he said calmly. Another blow, this time from Davis across the jaw. Ethan dropped to one knee. Riley crouched beside him. "You want justice? You'll get it. In pieces." Ethan looked up, his voice ragged but steady. "You're giving me everything I need." Riley froze. Ethan's eyes didn't flick to the cameras. Didn't need to. "Smile," Ethan whispered. "You're on candid confession." Riley cursed and lunged, grabbing Ethan by the collar, lifting him halfway before slamming him against the wall. The drywall cracked. Ethan slumped, still didn't resist. Because resistance would have blurred the lines. He needed clarity. Davis pulled Riley back. "We're done." Riley growled but let go. "Next time we won't be." They stormed out. The door slammed behind them, swinging on a fractured hinge. Ethan stayed on the floor a moment, ribs aching, blood trickling from a split lip. Then he stood, slowly, deliberately. He walked over to the nearest camera, held up 2 fingers and muttered, "Clip it, send." Within seconds, the footage was off-site Naomi's secured drive, the FBI drop folder, and a cloud server accessible only via 2-factor codes known to him and one other, Lina. He limped to the bathroom, washed his face, and studied the bruises blooming beneath the skin. They'd swell by morning. Perfect. He dried his hands on the same towel Valor once chewed, ragged at the edges, and then he smiled. Not in triumph, not in satisfaction, but in readiness. It was no longer his word against theirs. It was proof, and this time the system wouldn't be able to bury it. The file name was simple. Valor Tape Full Uncut .mp4. No titles, no overlays, no dramatic music, just the unblinking eye of truth, quiet, brutal, and undeniable. Naomi Keller sat at her kitchen table at 3:07 a.m., the footage open on her laptop, the cursor hovering over send. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from something deeper, conviction. She had been in the courtroom enough times to know how narratives were shaped. Clean uniforms, technical language, split-second decision-making. She'd seen enough sanitized press statements to fill volumes. But this was raw. She clicked play again. Ethan's door shattering, Riley's face twisted with cruelty, the blows, the blood, Ethan's restraint. And then those 7 words, "You just gave me what I needed." She didn't even flinch this time. She didn't need to watch it again. She sent the file, first to a contact within the FBI agent Lina, someone she'd once crossed paths with during a civil rights case involving police misconduct, then to a curated list of journalists, most of whom were too familiar with local intimidation tactics to ever get assignments approved through their usual chains. But Naomi knew one thing they all had in common. They hated cover-ups. And this was a matchstick tossed into dry brush. As the files transferred, she opened another window and queued up Lina's initial intake report. Age 12. Status minor witness. Pet deceased. She changed the last line. Pet deceased, K9 Valor, retired police service animal, shot in line of duty while shielding minor from unprovoked confrontation. She hit save. And then she wrote the first line of the press statement she would send with the footage. This is not just a case. This is a child. This is a veteran. This is a dog who served with honor and died in silence. By noon the next day, the video had been viewed 1.2 million times. The footage moved faster than any formal complaint ever had. It showed on blogs, Reddit forums, veteran communities, civil rights feeds, animal welfare pages. Hashtags multiplied. Hashtag justice for Valor. Hash she was 12. Hash he didn't bite. Hash retired, not threat. Lina's photo taken from a school project circulated widely. A candid shot. She and Valor curled up on a patch of grass, her hand resting on his side like it belonged there. It did. Comments flooded in from parents, from handlers, from people who didn't know her name but recognized something too close to home. One veteran wrote, "That dog did what he was trained to do, what he lived to do. He stood between danger and a child. And you called that aggression?" Another, "This could have been my daughter and our retired K9. Ethan didn't speak to the media. Neither did Lina. But Naomi did. She stood before reporters outside the Crestmoor courthouse, holding up a printed still from the video. Valor's silhouette in front of the girl, body rigid but calm, eyes locked on Riley. She didn't shout. She simply said, "They shot loyalty and tried to bury truth." That evening, Ethan sat in the dark again. But this time, the silence wasn't suffocating. It was full of motion, of vibration, as phones pinged, as inboxes overflowed, as momentum gathered like a storm on the edge of everything. He held Lina's old drawing pad. She hadn't touched it since. But now, a new page was half filled. A sketch of Valor. Not how he died, but how he stood. Ears perked, chest out. No fear, just duty. "Do you want to finish it?" he asked quietly when she walked in. She shook her head. "It's already done." He nodded. "Then maybe it's time we show the world what he was." She sat beside him, not touching, but closer than before. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Somewhere outside, someone lit a candle beneath a growing pile of dog toys, photos, and folded flags on the front steps of Crestmoor Police HQ. Someone else taped a poster to the doors. "He served. He saved. And you silenced him. But not anymore." The house looked nothing like the woman who once commanded entire precincts. A modest ranch half a mile off a gravel road outside Crestmoor. The kind of place that preferred birdsong to sirens, wind chimes over dispatch radios. The mailbox still bore a faded sticker, "Retired, not expired." Naomi Keller answered the door in an old hoodie and jeans, but her eyes hadn't dulled with time. They were sharp, assessing, the kind that had once read danger in the twitch of a suspect's fingers or the tail flick of a K9 at her heel. She didn't smile when she saw Ethan. She just opened the door wider and said, "Took you long enough?" Inside, she handed him tea without asking his preference. Then sat across from him at a worn kitchen table that had seen more strategy than most briefing rooms. "I saw the video," she said flatly. "That wasn't a dog misreading threat. That was a dog doing what we trained them to do, step between a kid and danger." Ethan's jaw clenched. "They called him aggressive." Naomi shook her head slowly. "Valor," she gave a bitter laugh. "He once got between me and a gunman in a drug house and didn't so much as growl when I cuffed the guy. He was trained for presence, not fear." Ethan pulled out a folder. Inside, Valor's certification records, training scores, incident logs, all clean, not one mark of warning, not a single complaint. But those weren't what mattered now. He slid over a printed shot from the footage. Valor's stance, Riley's face. Naomi stared at it for a long time. Then she said quietly, "That man should have never worn a badge." She stood and disappeared into the back room. When she returned, she held a thick, binder dusty, edges frayed, but labeled neatly in black marker. Riley, incidents, unresolved, flagged. Ethan blinked. "You kept that?" Naomi nodded. "Internal affairs sure didn't, but I never trusted what they scrubbed." She flipped it open, case after case notes in her handwriting, side comments, officer complaints that went nowhere, footage that accidentally got deleted, civilian statements never followed up. Many involved K-9 deployments. Too many had one common thread: Riley escalating situations, dogs getting blamed, reports rewritten. "You know what he hated most?" Naomi said, eyes locked on the page. "That I trusted the dogs more than the boys with guns." She looked up. "And he knew Valor was mine before he was yours?" She agreed to testify that night, not because she wanted to, but because silence had already cost too much. The department had changed since she left, and not for the better. Good officers pushed out, rules bent, and the old code protect the innocent left bleeding on the asphalt. "I won't be the only one," she said, pulling out her phone. "There are still a few of us out there, watching." She made one call. A former dispatcher, then another, an ex-sergeant from K-9. By the time Ethan left her porch under a deep blue sky, he knew the tide had shifted, because now Valor had a witness, not just to how he died, but to how he lived. That night, Naomi sat on her porch with her old service vest draped across her lap. She ran a hand over the faded patch. K-9 unit, Valor. And for the first time since she'd retired, she whispered his name out loud. "Good boy." Somewhere in the distance, a coyote called. Somewhere else, the world had begun to listen again. It started with a memo. One line, no signature, no press release. "Officer Theo Marsh is placed on indefinite administrative leave pending internal review." It hit the bulletin board by 9 a.m. Monday. By noon, his nameplate was gone from the patrol locker. By sundown, whispers followed. Some said he was cooperating with hostile parties. Others said he cracked under pressure. A few, the honest few, just said, "He told the truth, and that cost him." The department was splitting down the middle, and everyone felt it. Ethan found Marsh alone, seated on a rusted bench outside the Crestmoor station, tie loosened, badge gone, a half-eaten vending machine sandwich on his lap like some pitiful attempt at normalcy. He didn't flinch when Ethan approached. "Figured you'd show," Marsh muttered. Ethan sat beside him, elbows on knees. "You okay?" Marsh laughed short, humorless. "Define okay." "I'm suspended, my car's been keyed, my locker was trashed, and someone left a dead rat in my mailbox." A pause. "And still, some part of me wonders if it was worth it." Ethan looked him in the eye. It was. Marsh's voice cracked slightly. "I thought maybe it'd be enough. The footage. Naomi stepping in. I thought maybe the system would catch itself before it drowned." Ethan shook his head slowly. "Systems don't drown, Theo. They float on the backs of people they silence." Marsh exhaled. "Then let me sink for the right reason." Ethan didn't leave him there. He didn't make a speech. He just handed Marsh a burner phone. One of Naomi's contacts. Whistleblower protection team. Anonymous line. You're not alone. And then, before standing, Ethan added, You saw what Riley did. But what you don't know yet is who's backing him. That night, back at Naomi's apartment, they opened the file Marsh had risked his career to leak. It was thin, barely 2 pages, but enough. A receipt unusual transfer of overtime pay to Riley and Davis, signed off by a name neither Ethan nor Naomi recognized. Chief Operations Liaison, Victor Decker. Naomi blinked. That's not a name from around here. Ethan was already pulling up his laptop. It took 10 minutes, one background check, one deep scan search, and suddenly the screen filled with keywords no one wanted to see. Victor Decker, former private security, affiliated with Integrity Watch, USA, accused in 2018 of racial targeting and neighborhood control operations. Disappeared from public contracts in 2019, re-emerged as consultant in several small-town departments, always in areas with rising civil complaints. Naomi's voice went cold. This isn't Two Bad Cops anymore. Ethan clicked open a spreadsheet Naomi had been building for weeks. Names, dates, incidents linked to Riley and Davis. He scrolled, stopped. 3 officers reassigned within 6 months after speaking up about disproportionate K-9 deployments. 2 families moved out of Crestmoor after property seizures. 1 teenage boy, autistic, tased for non-compliance. All marked with one phrase, no body cam footage available. Back outside the department, Marsh sat in the dark, watching the door he used to enter with pride. He wasn't a hero. He hadn't blown the whole thing open. But maybe, just maybe, he'd loosened a brick. And sometimes that's all it takes before the whole wall comes down. It started as a map, one of those old-school laminated ones you'd see in an elementary classroom. Naomi tacked it to the basement wall below her apartment, where files couldn't be hacked, and conversations stayed between people, not screens. Push pins, red string, names written on index cards and tacked to neighborhoods most folks forgot existed once the sun went down. Ethan stood with his arms crossed, staring at the web they were building. It didn't look like a map of Crestmoor anymore. It looked like a wound. 9 cases. 9 families, military, mostly black or Latino, who had reported some version of the same story. Harassment, fabricated charges, unlawful searches, pets taken or killed under departmental procedure. None had made it past a local hearing. All were swept under catchphrases like non-compliance, officer discretion, or public safety risk. One by one, Naomi called each of them, not as a lawyer, as a neighbor. Family number 1, a black Navy vet named Lamont. His golden retriever was shot during a traffic stop because the officer claimed it lunged. The dashcam was mysteriously corrupted. No investigation followed. Family number 2, a Latina Air Force widow. Officers claimed her PTSD made her unfit to raise her 6-year-old son. DCFS got involved. She now lives 2 counties over. She'd named her Belgian Malinois Hope. Hope never made it through the seizure. Family number 5, an Iraqi vet with a therapy horse, a horse on private property. A noise complaint led to a raid. The horse was euthanized by animal control on site. Ethan couldn't believe the cruelty wasn't random, until Naomi said softly, "It's not cruelty, Ethan. It's policy disguised as paranoia." Ethan flipped to a folder labeled Canine Fatalities, Civilian and Retired Service Animals. 4 of them were German Shepherds. 3 had been trained by Valor's former unit. It wasn't just personal now. It was targeted. They met with a local journalist, Maya Tron, young, tenacious, and already burned by her own paper once for covering racial bias in a Crestmoor rezoning case. She listened in silence as Ethan and Naomi laid out the stories. When they finished, she didn't ask for permission to publish. She just whispered, "I'll tell it right, even if no one else will print it." By the third week of research, Ethan started to notice something else. The reports weren't just similar, they were templated. Same phrases, same vague justifications, same final line on every form. No further departmental action required. That's when Ethan understood. This wasn't just about Riley or Davis. They were symptoms. The disease ran deeper. Late one night, Lina came downstairs to the basement. She didn't speak. She just stared at the map, the photos, the pins. Then she quietly took a marker and drew a circle around one house, her own. "I thought it was just us," she said. Ethan knelt beside her. "It's not, and it never was." Her eyes shimmered. "Then how did no one stop it?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he pointed to each red pin. Because they were all told the same lie. "You're alone." That night, Ethan jotted a line in his notebook. "Patterns aren't conspiracies. They're the shadows left by hands that never got caught." At first, it sounded like a euphemism. Neighborhood Integrity Coalition. The phrase appeared in a scanned email attachment from an anonymous tip Maya received after her first article went semi-viral online. The message had no greeting, no sign-off, just a cryptic subject line. "If you want to know who's really running Crestmoor." Attached, a list of internal city memos, private HOA meeting minutes, and donor transaction records to a defunct neighborhood watch fund. The same names kept surfacing. Councilman Ryder, Deputy Chief Hensley, real estate developer Calvin Birch, and at the bottom of almost every document, Victor Decker, community consultant. Naomi read aloud a section from one memo dated 5 years prior. "Priority neighborhoods will undergo demographic stabilization via property code enforcement, safety audits, and cooperative animal control compliance. Coordinated with CIC and integrity partners. CIC, Crestmoor Integrity Coalition." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Stabilization?" Maya whispered what they were all thinking. They weren't stopping crime, they were erasing people. In an old storage unit Naomi once used for case files, they found even more evidence that the coalition wasn't just theory. It was organized, funded, and had existed long before Valor ever took a bullet. Photos of town hall meetings with closed-door attendance, maps of priority turnover zones, and, most damning, a brochure printed in slick navy and gold titled "Preserving Crestmoor's Heritage." Tagline, "Community character is safety. Safety is strength." Inside were smiling stock images, families grilling, children on tricycles. A German shepherd in one image, oddly familiar, until Ethan realized it was Valor, back when he was still on active duty. His stomach churned. They had used him. "Look at the wording," Naomi said, pointing. "Unwelcome elements. Shifting value demographics." It was all coded, politely venomous. Ethan didn't need it translated. He'd heard similar terms overseas, used to justify checkpoints and forced relocations. This was domestic warfare, disguised as beautification. Later that evening, Maya played a voicemail she'd received. It was shaky, muffled like the caller was speaking through fabric. "They meet every quarter, usually at the Birch Country Club. No cell phones allowed. Decker leads. They use burner phones. They call it the Pact. If you say no, you lose funding. Or worse." The voice dropped to a whisper. "Don't trust Riley. He's not just a foot soldier, he's enforcement. He does the dirty work no one else signs off on. And he likes it. Click. That same night, Ethan stared at the map again. But this time he drew a second web. Overlapping the red string, he added blue lines connecting council names to code enforcement actions, green lines linking animal control to sudden seizures, and black pins for each family who'd moved out in the last 5 years, some even in the middle of the night. It was no longer just a pattern, it was a network, a coordinated effort. And at the center of it all, Decker. "We have to go public," Maya said. "Now!" But Ethan shook his head. "No, not yet. If we move too early, they'll clean house, wipe records, silence the rest. We need more than suspicion." Naomi leaned over the map, her voice low. "Then we find someone inside. Someone who's still loyal to truth, not tradition." Ethan closed his eyes for a long moment, then opened them with resolve. "Then we're not just exposing a shooting anymore." He pointed at the red pin over their house, the one Lina had circled. "We're dismantling a system that thought no one would ever fight back." The name had been on the documents all along. Small, quiet, almost administrative. Victor Decker title, Community Consultant. Affiliation, Private Security Liaison, Tier 3 clearance. But it wasn't until Naomi ran the name through a series of federal court records that the truth surfaced like oil on water. "Ethan," she said, her voice low, almost reverent in disbelief, "you need to see this." She turned the laptop around. The web page flickered slightly under the basement's exposed bulb. A sealed deposition, a Senate subcommittee transcript, an expunged but never forgotten contractor profile from 2011. And there he was. Square jaw, dead eyes. Victor Decker, former military contractor, dishonorably released from a now-defunct private defense firm called Kestrel Group International. His specialty? Behavioral enforcement strategies in hostile domestic environments. Ethan leaned in, a coldness starting to settle in his gut. "That's coded language," he muttered. Naomi nodded grimly. "It means civilian suppression. Crowd control without fingerprints." Worse still, Decker had once trained counterinsurgency units. But after 2014, his work turned inward consulting with urban development boards and regional integrity alliances. All code, all protected, all off books. One file Naomi accessed, encrypted, and anonymously leaked outlined Decker's tier system. Tier 1, long-standing white families with political ties or city service records. Tier 2, compliant newcomers. Tier 3, at-risk residents, vets, immigrants, minority families. Tier 4, destabilizing elements, labeled for removal. Valor's name had been redacted from a Tier 3 family profile, but the timestamp matched Lina's school registration date. That was the moment Ethan felt it. They marked us before he was even shot. Maya arrived with a brown envelope. Inside, grainy surveillance photos, likely smuggled out by her source. One showed Decker speaking with Riley in the Birch Country Club parking lot, another Decker shaking hands with Chief Hensley, and a third, a black duffel bag being exchanged near a Crestmoor police cruiser. "It's not just ideology anymore," Maya whispered. "This is tactical." Later that night, Ethan stood by the basement wall, staring at Decker's photo. He was the kind of man Ethan had fought overseas. The kind who used flags to hide fists, the kind who never needed to pull a trigger. He just made sure others did. Ethan wrote beneath Decker's photo in thick red ink. He didn't just kill Valor, he trained the man who did. Lina came down quietly, holding her sketch pad. She handed Ethan a page crude but heartbreaking. It showed Valor standing in front of a building with barred windows and shadows inside. Above it she'd written, "They make cages and call it safe." Ethan held her close, the anger inside him now molten, tempered only by the trembling arms wrapped around his waist. The next morning Naomi looked Ethan in the eye. "We have enough to expose the entire operation. But if we go after Decker, we won't just be fighting city politics anymore." He nodded slowly. "This isn't about Crestmoor now." He looked at Lina, eating cereal in silence, sketchpad by her elbow. "It's about every town that looks away, while men like him design the rules." And then Ethan said the words none of them had dared to voice out loud until now. This was never just about Valor. It began with a knock that didn't wait, rhythmic, calculated, like authority announcing itself before showing a badge. Ethan opened the door to 2 agents from DCFS. "Mr. Brooks," the taller began, scanning the house, "we're responding to a secondary welfare concern involving your daughter Lina. You were here 3 weeks ago. Case closed. No findings." Ethan replied, tense. "This is a follow-up," the woman said flatly. "We've been authorized to assess the environment and remove the minor if warranted." "Where's the warrant?" "We don't need one under Section 306 in emergent conditions." "You're not walking through that door." Before the agents could respond, Lina appeared at the stairs. Seeing them, she dropped, gasping panic attack. Ethan scooped her up, whispering comfort she couldn't hear. Naomi arrived fast. "You're trespassing. Injunction's been filed," she snapped, slapping a court order at the agents. The agents retreated, but the damage was done. That night, Lina wouldn't leave Ethan's room. She clutched Valor's old hoodie and whispered, "Why do they keep coming?" Ethan had no answer, just, "Because people like Riley don't want us here. But we're not leaving." Later, Naomi smoked on the porch. "They're escalating. Couldn't bury the tape, so they're going after the heart." Ethan stared at the dark sedan across the street. "Then let's give them something to fear." By midnight, Ethan had Lina bundled in the back seat, sketchpad and Valor's blanket in hand. They drove back roads, avoiding the highway. At dawn, they stopped at a diner. "Do you feel safer here?" Ethan asked. Lina nodded. Later he called Naomi. "I took her. I know. You could lose your license." "I don't care. I won't lose Lina. I need a few days. A place to breathe." "You don't have days." They reached a cabin by sunset. Lina explored the edge of the woods. Progress. Inside, Ethan lit the fire, shadows dancing like old ghosts. "Will they come here too?" Lina asked that night. "No, sweetheart." "But what if they say you're dangerous?" "Do you think I am?" She shook her head. "Then that's what matters." The next day they walked into Haven Pine's small town, forgotten on most maps. An Adoption Day banner hung across a barn shelter. Inside, the smell of hay and soap filled the air. They passed barking dogs. One, small and quiet, just watched. Lina stopped. The puppy leaned into her touch. No begging, no whining. "He's not like Valor," she said. "No," Ethan agreed. "He's not meant to be." The shelter worker, Marla, said, "Found tied to a sign. Note said, 'Too much trouble. No name.'" Lina thought, then whispered, "Nico." Marla promised to hold him 48 hours. As they left, Lina asked Ethan, "Can we come back tomorrow?" First full sentence in days. That night, Lina sketched Nico, then Nico beside Valor, under a pine. Caption, "I don't need to forget you to love again." Ethan stood outside under the stars. Tomorrow would bring more danger. But tonight, Lina had chosen to return to something not run. And that was the first spark. It began the way storms always do, quiet at first, then without apology. At 4:47 a.m., Crestmoor still slept. Porch lights flickered over empty sidewalks. Sprinklers ticked on in rhythm. Newspaper trucks rolled through like ghosts. And then, boom, boom, boom. The first door came off its hinges on Arbor Drive. 20 miles south, another rayed black SUVs cutting through fog like blades. At precisely 4:51, federal agents surrounded Riley's home. They moved in coordinated silence. No unnecessary noise. No warning. Only the red beams of tactical flashlights slicing through the dark. Inside, Riley didn't have time to reach for the drawer. Didn't have time to spin a lie. Didn't even have time to scream before a voice commanded, "Hands on your head! Do it now!" They cuffed him face down in his hallway, still in his undershirt, still reeking of bourbon, and read him his rights. The moment was recorded, live, sent directly to Naomi's encrypted inbox. Ethan watched it unfold on her laptop from the cabin's kitchen, fingers clenched around a chipped coffee mug. "That's one," Naomi whispered. By 5:06, Davis was pulled from a lakeside rental he never reported on any department form. The agents found 3 unregistered firearms and a stack of burner phones, one still buzzing with a missed call from Vic D. At 5:14, a quiet knock at Victor Decker's security compound turned into a battering ram. He ran. He made it 12 steps before a federal K9A Belgian Malinois named Torque brought him down hard. Torque didn't bark, didn't bite, just stood over Decker until the cuffs clicked and someone muttered, "He's going away for a long time." The raid count reached 11. City council members, code enforcement officers, a real estate lawyer, 2 off-duty cops, a school board vice chair, every one of them linked by records, bank accounts, sealed complaints, or the encrypted files Ethan had unearthed in Chapter 7. The web was now visible, torn open, and the spiders were running. By dawn, Crestmoor was awake, and no longer silent. Local headlines screamed, "Racial corruption scandal rocks Crestmoor PD, retired K9 death sparks federal crackdown, domestic extremist cell tied to suburban police ring, news vans lined entire blocks. Helicopters thumped overhead. Protesters gathered outside City Hall before the mayor had even finished his cereal. And on every screen over and overplayed the footage Naomi had leaked of Valor's final moments. The still frame that gripped the nation, a girl on her knees, a dog bleeding out, 2 officers unmoved. At the cabin, Lina sat on the couch wrapped in a blanket. Nico curled up beside her, head resting on her lap like he already knew the world outside was shifting. She watched the news without blinking. When Riley's mugshot appeared, she whispered, "That's him." Ethan knelt beside her, hand on her shoulder. "He won't hurt anyone again." Naomi's phone didn't stop buzzing. Interview requests, DOJ liaisons, activists offering support, anonymous tips flooding in. At one point, she simply turned the volume down and let the world keep spinning. "This is going to get bigger," she warned Ethan. "Good," he said. So did they. Later that afternoon, the FBI lead investigator called. His voice was clipped, professional, but there was something else under it. Respect. "Mr. Brooks, your documentation was meticulous. Without it, we wouldn't have had jurisdiction. You gave us the crack. We took the wall." Ethan said only, "It was never just about my daughter." There was a pause, then, "I think you already know this, but you just changed everything." And still, there was no celebration, no champagne, no victory speech. Just the quiet weight of justice finally breathing for the first time in years, and the knowledge that breathing didn't mean healing. Not yet. That night, Ethan stepped out onto the porch. The cabin lights glowed warm behind him. Lina was asleep inside. Nico snored at the foot of her bed. He lit a candle, placed it on the porch rail, and beside it, one of Valor's old tags, worn down but still legible. The wind picked up, carried the flame sideways for a second before steadying. Ethan looked up at the stars and whispered, "One for you, old boy. We're not done." But today, they listened. The courtroom was colder than it should have been, not in temperature, but in tone, like someone had drained the air of anything human, the kind of silence only marble and microphones could make. Lina sat at the witness table, her legs swinging just above the ground, too short to reach. Her hands were folded in her lap, not shaking, just still, too still for a child. Judge Harmon glanced at her, then at Ethan, seated beside her. Naomi sat 2 rows back, arms crossed, watching every breath. District Attorney Cole leaned forward. "Lina, I know this is hard, but if you're able, can you tell the court what happened that day?" Silence. The girl blinked, but didn't move, didn't speak. Cole tried again, voice gentler. "You're safe now. Nothing bad can happen to you here. You're brave just for showing up." Still, nothing. Ethan placed a hand over hers. A nod. No pressure. Lina slowly reached into the small canvas bag she'd brought with her, ignored by the guards because she was 12, and it looked like a pencil case. She pulled out a folded sheet of paper, took her time, smoothing the creases, then stood. Quietly, steadily, she walked to the front of the courtroom toward the clerk's desk. No one stopped her. Not the bailiff, not the judge, not the attorneys. Lina laid the paper down like it was sacred, then returned to her seat. Cole picked it up first, his mouth parted, but no sound came. He passed it to the judge, and silence deepened. On the page, hand-drawn in thick charcoal pencil, was an image. A child small, shoulders curved inward facing a wall of faceless officers. Each uniform identical. No features, no humanity. Standing between her and the wall was Valor. Ears forward, stance strong, eyes fierce. But what broke everyone in that room wasn't just the image. It was the detail. Bullets embedded in Valor's side. And behind him, the child's hand gripping his tail, not out of fear, but faith. He was her wall, and he never moved. Judge Harmon cleared his throat, the sound catching mid-air. He wiped at his glasses, though they hadn't fogged. "Let the court note this drawing as Exhibit C," he said, voice tighter than before, "and may it be preserved with all case records." Cole whispered to his assistant, "You want testimony? That's louder than anything words could do." The defense team didn't object. They couldn't. Even they weren't that hollow. When the session ended, no reporters were allowed inside. But word got out. By nightfall, the image had been scanned, shared, posted, and printed. The #ValorShield hashtag trended in 14 cities. Veterans reposted it. School teachers printed it. Artists painted murals overnight on brick walls in Crestmoor. One caption read, "She didn't need to speak. Her truth had already bled." Outside the courthouse, Lina walked beside Ethan in silence. Until, "Do you think he saw it?" she asked softly. Ethan paused. I think he never stopped watching. She nodded, then held his hand just for a moment before letting it go again. That night, Naomi received a call. The judge had requested a private copy of the drawing, not for evidence. "For his office," he said, "so I never forget what this was really about." Courtroom 4B was packed, not with spectators, those had been barred due to security concerns, but with tension, thick, throat-tightening tension, the kind that settled over every shoulder and made every breath feel louder than it should be. Riley sat at the defense table, cuffed, clean-shaven, still wearing that smug tilt in his jaw, as if he expected to walk out the way he always had, with a nod from the judge, a grin from the bailiff, and a pat on the back from the system that had always protected him. But not today. Today, the oxygen belonged to someone else. Naomi adjusted the file of evidence in her lap. Ethan sat beside her, silent, eyes locked on Riley. There was no hatred in his stare, just clarity, cold, precise, like a man who had fought too many wars to be rattled by a bully in a suit. Lina wasn't in the room. She didn't need to be. Her drawing had already left its mark. The court clerk stood. "State versus Officer Travis Riley and Officer Brent Davis, bail hearing." Judge Harmon entered without pomp. He didn't need a gavel to command attention. He opened the folder in front of him and looked up, expression unreadable. "We've reviewed sworn affidavits, department communications, video surveillance, incident reports, and most notably physical assault footage submitted by the plaintiffs," the judge began. Riley leaned back in his chair. Davis, seated beside him, didn't. Sweat pooled at his collar. "Gentlemen," Judge Harmon said, voice sharpening, "this isn't about one incident. This is about a pattern, a culture, a willful corruption of duty." Defense Attorney Kaplan cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my clients have no prior convictions, long-standing careers, that have now been credibly linked to multiple violations of civil rights, including the targeting of military families and the unlawful killing of a service dog," Harmon cut in. Kaplan paled. Judge Harmon exhaled and leaned forward. "This court finds the risk of witness intimidation, obstruction of justice, and further harm too great. Bail is denied." The words dropped like a blade. Not a murmur followed. Riley froze. His jaw twitched. Davis slumped forward, cursing under his breath. The bailiff approached to escort them out, but Riley turned just once to look at Ethan. And for the first time, that look held fear. Not anger, not control, but the naked realization that the fortress he'd hidden behind, badges, titles, shields, had finally crumbled. Ethan didn't blink. He didn't need to. Because truth had already done what violence couldn't. It had stripped power from the man who thought he'd never fall. Outside the courtroom, Naomi exhaled. "That's one wall down." Ethan nodded. "The others will follow?" Then he added almost to himself, "They always do, once the first brick breaks." The news exploded within the hour. No bail granted for officers in canine shooting case. Feds unseal patterns of targeting veterans' service animals. Valor shield movement grows as justice gains ground. Social media flooded with side-by-side images. Riley in cuffs versus Valor in uniform. Veterans groups announced donations to civil rights watchdogs. An anonymous donor offered to pay for a memorial statue, one of a dog standing between a child and a wall of faceless figures. The caption, Not all heroes wear armor. Some wear fur. That evening, Ethan stood outside the courthouse under the settling dusk. He didn't smile, but he let out a long breath, one he'd been holding since the shot that split his daughter's world in two. Naomi joined him, briefcase in hand. "You okay?" He nodded. "Getting there." They stood in silence a while longer. Then Ethan said, "He looked at me." "Riley?" "Yeah." And for the first time, he knew he'd lost. The house was still quiet, but it no longer felt hollow. Dust motes drifted through shafts of afternoon light as Lina knelt on the floor of the living room, hands full of softness, a plush fleece blanket, a small memory foam cushion, a frayed chew toy shaped like a fox. Not new, not pristine, but stitched with care. This wasn't about starting over. It was about starting with. Nico, a scrappy little shepherd mix with oversized ears and hesitant paws, watched from the corner. He didn't rush, didn't bark, just tilted his head and waited. Lina glanced over her shoulder. "You can come closer, you know." The pup took one cautious step, then another. She smiled. Not wide, not like before, but the kind of smile that had something buried in it, something brave. "This is your bed," she said softly, patting the spot she'd just fluffed. "But I put it next to his." She looked at the space just to the left. Valor's old bed remained untouched, flattened in the middle, worn at the edges. Ethan had offered gently to put it away more than once. She had shaken her head each time. It wasn't just a dog bed. It was a monument. Now a new one sat beside it. Not to replace, to accompany. She sat cross-legged, Nico curling beside her in a cautious half-circle. "I know you're not him," Lina whispered. "I don't want you to be." Her fingers moved across the blanket, slow and deliberate. "But I also don't want to stop loving him just because he's not here." Outside the window, the wind shifted. Leaves tumbled across the porch, brushing against Valor's leash still hooked beside the doorframe. Ethan hadn't moved that either, because neither of them was quite ready to stop remembering. And maybe they never had to. Upstairs, Ethan stood just out of view, watching from the hallway. He didn't interrupt. He didn't say a word. This wasn't a moment to step into. It was one to let unfold. Downstairs, Lina leaned closer to Nico. The pup licked her knuckles once, then curled a bit tighter against her thigh. She felt the weight of his small body and closed her eyes. "His name was Valor," she said quietly. "He saved me." She waited for the tears, the tremble, but neither came. Just a strange kind of stillness, not the kind that hurt, the kind that felt heard. "I used to think the silence meant something was wrong," she continued. "After he was gone, the house felt like it couldn't breathe, like the air forgot how to move." Nico shifted, let out a tiny sigh. "But now, when it's quiet, I think maybe it's because he's still here, just in the parts that don't make noise." She reached toward the space between the beds. Her hand hovered their open palm, nothing in it but everything inside. "I hope that's okay with you," she said. "I'm going to love you too. Just differently." The puppy responded the only way he knew how, by gently pressing his nose into her hand. And that, somehow, was enough. Later that night, Ethan came down the stairs to find her asleep on the rug, head tilted back, Nico curled on her chest. The fireplace was low, a few embers casting orange glow across the floor. 2 beds, 2 stories, One past, one beginning, and in the middle, a girl finally resting. He approached quietly and draped a soft quilt over them, then lowered himself beside Valor's bed. For a moment, he rested his hand on the fabric. "Still watching over her," he murmured. "You always did." Then his eyes moved to Nico. "Keep listening, okay?" he whispered. "She still needs to talk." Outside, the wind rose again. Not like a storm, like a memory, like the breath of something brave returning to the house. Not to haunt it, but to remind it. Home isn't made by what's lost. It's built by what we're willing to carry forward. The morning sunlight spilled across the porch in long golden streaks, warm and quiet, like a hush after a storm. Ethan sat in his usual spot, coffee untouched, pen steady in his hand. On the small wooden table beside him sat a stack of photos. Valor in uniform. Valor curled at Lina's feet, Valor standing between a man and the unknown. And beneath those, a single envelope, unsealed, addressed by hand, to Commander Franklin Reyes, 3rd K-9 Operations Unit, Retur, Fort Addington, TX. Ethan stared at the letter he'd written 3 times already. The words weren't difficult. It was the weight they carried that kept breaking the paper, but this time it stayed together. And now he began again, not to grieve, but to give. "Commander Reyes, you may not remember me. We crossed paths briefly in 2011 during Valor's first deployment cycle. You gave me a dog and said, 'He'll know what you need before you do.' You were right. He saved my life in more ways than one. But more importantly, he saved my daughter's. This letter isn't about reopening old wounds. It's about planting something new." Ethan paused, listened to the low thump of paws behind him. Nico. The little shepherd mix was nosing at a tennis ball, not biting, not barking, just holding it like it was too important to lose. Ethan smiled, then kept writing. "I've been thinking about how many kids like my daughter live with holes they can't name, and how many retired working dogs like Valor still have love left to give. So here's my proposal. A fund, a mission, a bridge. Let's connect retired K-9's dogs who've served, dogs who've seen with children who've lost. Not as pets, as partners. Give the dogs a second calling. Give the kids a companion who understands the language of silence and shadow. We'll call it the Valor Initiative." He underlined the name once, then leaned back, watching the ink settle like a promise on the page. Inside, through the screen door, Lina was humming again, not loudly, not clearly, but enough. Ethan closed his eyes. The first time she ever hummed, she was 3. In the back of a military vehicle during his first post-deployment road trip home, she hummed in her car seat. Valor, then a younger version of himself, sat beside her with one paw resting protectively on her leg. They hadn't known yet how much they'd need each other, but life had a way of preparing you even when you didn't know what for. He looked down at the letter one last time. "I can handle the first round of fundraising. I've spoken to Naomi Keller, civil rights attorney, and Valor's former captain. She's in. We'll do this the right way. Trauma-informed placements, proper vetting, aftercare support. I'm not asking for permission. I'm asking for partnership. Let this legacy mean more than just one story. Let it grow into thousands. With respect, Ethan Brooks, Valor's handler, Valor's friend, Valor's family." He folded the letter carefully, sealed the envelope, and for the first time in months, Something shifted inside him, not away from grief, but toward purpose. Later that afternoon, he and Lina walked to the small red mailbox down by the gravel road. Nico trotted between them, still unsure of his steps, but trusting the ones who led him. "This letter," Ethan said, holding it up for her to see, "is about him." Lina took it gently, turned it over. "What does it say?" "It says, he's not done helping people." She looked up. "Even now?" Ethan nodded. "Especially now." Then she dropped the letter into the mailbox. The flap closed with a soft click. They stood there a moment longer, as if honoring something sacred. And maybe they were, because not all legacies are made of marble. Some are stitched in fur and memory and paw prints across a soul. The crickets had returned. Not the kind that kept you awake, but the kind that whispered, "It's okay to rest now." A warm breeze stirred through the trees surrounding the brook's backyard, gently rustling the tall grass that had grown wild this summer, untamed, alive, and undisturbed. Like them. A blanket lay stretched out over the soft ground. On it, 2 silhouettes. Ethan, arms folded behind his head, stared up at the sky. Beside him, Lina mimicked his posture, her long hair spilling across the fabric like ink in moonlight. Nico lay curled at their feet, rising only to chase the occasional moth or nudge Lina's elbow for affection. The night above was clear, too clear, and Ethan found himself holding his breath because something about this much peace always made him brace for the next blow. But none came. Just stars, just breathing, and the voice of his daughter, gentle, small, whole. "There's Orion," she said, pointing upward. "That one right there with the belt." He followed her hand. "Yeah, I remember." "And there's Canis Major," she added, quieter now. "The dog that follows him." A pause. Ethan turned slightly, just enough to see her profile in the pale silver wash of starlight. "Did you learn that at school?" he asked. She shook her head. "No, Valor taught me." They both fell silent. Not the heavy kind they'd carried for weeks, but the kind you choose, when you don't need words to feel close to someone who's gone. "Do you think he's still out there?" she asked after a while. Ethan didn't answer immediately. He let the sky speak first. The stars didn't blink. They burned, fixed, steady, watching. "I think," he said finally, "that the ones we love don't leave. Not really. They just step a little out of reach." Lina tilted her head toward him. He turned his face fully toward her. "And I think she'd be proud of you." She blinked. "She?" He nodded slowly. Lina didn't ask who. She didn't have to, because Valor wasn't just a dog. She was something bigger, a bridge between who they were and who they had to become. "You didn't let go," he added, voice hoarse. "You held on in all the ways that mattered." Lina turned back toward the sky. "She was braver than I'll ever be," she whispered. Ethan smiled faintly. "You're wrong." He didn't push the point. Just let it hang there like a gentle truth waiting to land. The wind picked up for a moment, cool but soft, threading through the trees and rustling the leaves above them. Nico stirred, let out a sleepy puff, and laid his head on Lina's knee. She scratched behind his ears absent-mindedly, her gaze never leaving the stars. "I talk to her sometimes," she said. Ethan nodded. "I know. I know she doesn't answer back, but it helps. She doesn't have to speak, Ethan replied. You already know what she'd say. They laid in that silence a while longer. Then, quietly, Ethan reached over and took her hand. It was small in his, warm, steady, no longer trembling. I miss her every day, Lina whispered. I do too, but I don't think I'm scared anymore. Ethan blinked slowly. Why's that? She exhaled, eyes fixed on the night sky. Because she taught me how to protect something. And now I have Nico. The pup wagged his tail in his sleep as if on cue, thumping once against the blanket. Ethan looked at her with something caught between awe and ache. She wasn't just healing, she was becoming. The moon slipped from behind a cloud, painting the field around them in silver. And somewhere in the distance, far beyond fences or headlines or shadows, an owl called out, slow and mournful. It didn't feel like sadness. It felt like permission. You ready to go in soon? Ethan asked. Not yet, she said. And so they stayed. Beneath a sky that had seen war and sorrow and birth and love, a sky that held their losses without judgment, a sky that welcomed the quiet, breathing hearts of those left behind without asking them to move on, only to move forward, together, under the same sky. In a world often marked by injustice and noise, the story of Valor reminds us that loyalty, love, and quiet courage still endure. German shepherds like Valor are more than protectors. They are family, healers, and silent witnesses to our most vulnerable moments. Through Lina's journey, we see the raw impact of grief, but also the strength born from it. We learn that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means honoring the past by choosing to live with purpose. This isn't just a story about one dog or one family. It's a call to cherish the bonds we form with animals who ask for nothing, yet give everything. It's about the power of speaking out, even when your voice shakes or when all you can offer is a drawing. Let Valor's legacy be more than a headline. Let it be a movement. To protect those who cannot speak. To believe children when they grieve. To value our four-legged heroes not just for what they do, but for who they are. Because sometimes the bravest hearts don't wear badges. They wag their tails, stand in front of danger, and never stop loving, even after they're gone.